fellow Falcoholics. What is up? Welcome to another episode of the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Knight, here to bring you the Falcons versus Saints week 12 game preview. As I'm sure you guys understand, this week, Thanksgiving, tough to find guests to make it work in the schedule. A lot of people are traveling. A lot of people are over the place. So just going to be me for this one, but I think we'll be able to have a good Saints guest lined up for later in the season. So definitely look forward to that, folks. But for now, you're just going to have to deal with me talking about the Saints, which I'm sure will be just fine. We're going to get into this matchup, the implications. Obviously, we talked about it a lot last time on Falcoholic Live, sort of how this game basically is make or break for the Falcons' playoff chances, if you're a believer in that still happening. Because if they beat the Saints, there's actually a realistic chance of it happening. If they lose to the Saints, there's not. They're going to need a miracle at that point. So, this is really the Falcons season in a nutshell here. And it's going to be a tough game. Obviously, the Saints are not the juggernaut. They're not even really a good team at this point, but they do still have a good defense. And they have an offense that has produced at times. It's been very inconsistent, much like Atlanta's, with a lot more invested in it. But, this is another flawed team, and the Falcons are very flawed as well. So it'll be two flawed teams going at it. But we know that these two teams, when they play each other, they're going to give each other their best shot. And I expect nothing less. So we will get into this, get into the matchups, get into how the Falcons look in this one. I believe Atlanta's 1-point favorite, so we'll see how they fare in that regard. But going to be a tough game and an absolutely critical one for Atlanta's playoff chances. Before we dive in deeper, folks, want to bring you a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline.ag, folks. The holiday season is off and rolling with the NFL in full stride and the NBA and NHL hitting mid-season form. BetOnline.ag remains your number one destination for all your sports wagering info. You can get up-to-the-minute sports wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions. And BetOnline is the top spot for everything involving pro and amateur sports. And it's not just the Big Four. BetOnline has info available at your fingertips with both desktop and mobile access anytime for almost any sport that you could think of, any sport that's played, whether that's MMA fighting, international soccer. They've got all kinds of stuff for you guys there. So what are you waiting for, folks? Head to that website, betonline.ag today. Just remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. And we'll also take a quick break here to bring you this week's prize picks. So we'll be right back. Hey guys, welcome to this week's Prize Picks segment here on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. We've got a Thanksgiving slate of picks here for you on today's show. Like I mentioned on the Wednesday show, Prize Picks running a Thanksgiving promotion for Christian McCaffrey, getting more than a half-yard rushing and receiving. So obviously we're going to go for that one to basically act as like a free square. And then, of course, got to make two more picks here. You can also make between 2 and 6 of your own if you want to go through your own. I like 3. I think that's like a good mix of like enough winnings. If you go for the 3 power play, you get 5 times, whereas it's just 3 times with the 2. So going, a little bit more risk for a little bit more reward there. So we'll see how that goes. But going with some different picks with Younghoe Koo's injury. We're going to stay away from him this week just because I'm not sure if he's going to play. So instead, we're going to go with another Thursday game, going with Washington running back Antonio Gibson, more than 15.5 receiving yards. Gibson was crushing it in the receiving game before his injury. I think he had like 50-plus receiving yards in each of the last 3 games. He's gotten like 6 or 7 targets. So Gibson is definitely a guy that's going to catch a lot of passes, and 15.5 is pretty low. Definitely much lower than like Bijan or even like Rachaad White, who I was going with. His is in the 30s now. So definitely with this 15.5, it's a very achievable number for him, especially even if he's a little bit banged up still. Even if he's getting just a couple of dump off passes, that 15.5 receiving number, not very hard to break. And then for our Atlanta pick this week, we're going with Bijan Robinson, more than 62.5 rushing yards. We got Parker Hesse back, so to me that means that the rushing attack is about to be completely unlocked. And the Saints actually not a great run defending team this year. They're 23rd in yards per carry allowed. Now, the Falcons haven't exactly lit up bad run defenses this year, but given that Bijan's been getting more involved in terms of carries, he had over 20 for the first time in the last game. I think this number is very, very achievable for him. Probably we won't see this number be this low again for a little while, especially if he has a great week. So going to go with Bijan here. He's probably the only player on the Falcons offense I really trust at this point. And him getting in this, getting above 62.5 rush yards seems pretty achievable to me. So that's my picks this week, guys. Just a quick reminder for those of you joining for the first time, PrizePicks is a skill-based daily fantasy game where you pick 2 to 6 players, decide if they will go more or less than their PrizePicks projection. The more players you pick, the more you can win, all the way up to 25 times your money on any entry. And at PrizePicks, you aren't competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. PrizePicks also has a very generous promotion schedule. Like I mentioned, the Thanksgiving promotion, they also regularly do stuff on Tuesday called Taco Tuesday, and then they have Flex Friday as well, where you can get some promotional bets. So keep your eyes open for that. It's not just the NFL too. They've obviously got the NBA going now, MLB when that's going, NHL, PGA, college football, you name it, they've got it. And PrizePicks entries can be made in 60 seconds or less, and they offer fast withdrawals. It's that easy. Guys, all first-time users that deposit and use our promo code DBB, you guys will receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. That means if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Just make sure if you're signing up to use that promo code DBB to make sure you get that instant deposit match. And notably, guys, PrizePicks available in 31 states, including Georgia. So definitely check it out. I've had a lot of fun with it this season. And of course, thanks again to PrizePicks for sponsoring the show. Welcome back to Dirty Birds and Brews, Falcons versus Saints, Week 12 game preview. Folks, a lot to get to in this one, and I'll just repeat some of the stuff we talked about on Falcoholic Live, which was that this is really a critical game for Atlanta's playoff chances, however you slice it, right? If they win this game against the Saints, they will take over the NFC South immediately thanks to tiebreakers, and they will also, of course, give the Saints that loss. So both these teams will be 5-6. Atlanta will have the head-to-head and the better divisional record. They'll be perfect at 3-0 in the division. And Atlanta will take over first place. So they will be slotted into the playoffs as of Week 12 with that win. It also matters for their long-term projection in terms of the playoff chances. I believe Atlanta's chances with a win this week, they increased to a respectable 39%. That's not bad. That's actually a pretty solid chance. It doesn't really take a miracle. At that point, it's more than a 1 in 3 chance there. It does. The Falcons would basically control their destiny at that point. If they're able to win the games they need to win, they don't have to win out or anything like that, but they do need to probably win their division games and probably sweep the Saints to complete this sort of playoff run. But that's not impossible. This is an easy schedule. We've talked about it a lot. And the Saints are far from this unbeatable team. Obviously we'll see how the Falcons actually look against them this week. But 39% chance, not a bad shot at all. That's pretty reasonable and a legitimate chance for the Falcons if they were able to pull this off. If they lose, that drops down to 10%. And that's really just because, there's still a chance that that if the Saints win this game, they still collapse. They still play poorly. The Falcons play them again late in the season for a chance to sort of reverse the tiebreaker or, get that head-to-head win and overtake them at the end. So, but again, that 10% is much less likely. That goes to 1 in 10 chance versus a 1 in 3 chance. Completely different story. And I think the Falcons are definitely hoping to avoid that eventuality and just get this dub this week, because not only is beating the Saints an absolute necessity for the Falcons to sort of reinvigorate the fan base. I mean, look, you guys know, the fan base is at an all-time low this season, coming off this 3-game losing streak. We're going back to Desmond Ridder, which I approve of, but it feels like we just wasted a bunch of time there with the whole Taylor Heineke thing. I guess, the buzz is that, we wanted to give Ridder a reset and all this. I mean, I don't know. Things are really stacking up negatively for this team. We're going back to Ridder. I hope that's the spark that this team needs. Arthur Smith is talking about, we're going to use Bijan more and all this. And it's like, well, why the hell weren't you using him, earlier when we really needed to be winning these games? But, that notwithstanding, it's really put up or shut up time. This is it. If you lose this game, you're done. There's no realistic chance of this team making the playoffs if they lose this game to the Saints. And, how they've responded so far in these sort of must-win situations. I mean, we heard them talking about, the Cardinals game is our Super Bowl, and they botched that. They botched the Vikings. They botched the Titans. So, they haven't responded well in these must-win situations at all. Basically, through Arthur Smith's entire tenure in these situations where they've had to win to keep their hopes alive, they've lost every time. So this would be a reversal from previous years if they're able to actually win this key game and actually give themselves hope. So we'll see if they can. I'm going to pick the Falcons, spoiler alert, but I don't feel great about it. And it's mostly because the Saints are absolutely reeling from injuries, and that's a great time to segue into checking out this Saints injury situation, which of course features a lot of names, right? A number of players for the Saints dealing with significant injuries. We've seen wide receiver Michael Thomas, who has been far from like elite Michael Thomas this year, but still one of the starting receivers on the Saints. He was just placed on IR. Quarterback Marshawn Lattimore is maybe expected to be placed on IR, but he's going to miss this game for sure. And the Saints were also without running back Kendre Miller, who's been their backup running back, tight end Jimmy Graham, and both offensive tackles James Hurst and Ryan Ramczyk. During Wednesday's practice, we haven't gotten Thursday's report yet at the time of recording, so I don't know how that's going to change. The one positive sign for them, depending on how you slice this, Derek Carr was back to being a full participant on Wednesday, so it seems likely that he's going to clear the concussion protocol. If you ask me, I think that's better for the Falcons to play Derek Carr than Jameis Winston, who has traditionally given the Falcons fits. The Falcons have actually done pretty well against like pocket passers and veterans, and they've really struggled against guys in their first starts. That's been their kryptonite, which is just ridiculous. But I think they'll fare better against Derek Carr than they would against Jameis Winston. I'm sure we're still going to see a lot of Taysom Hill because the Saints are continuing to use him, and the Falcons are awful at defending the quarterback run. So, I do think we're going to see a lot of Taysom Hill in this game, one way or the other. But I think if going against Derek Carr is probably a better situation for this Falcons defense, and they're going to, not having to cover Michael Thomas, who traditionally tends to go off against this team. That's going to help because the Saints don't have tremendous wide receiver depth at this point. Obviously, Rashid Shaheed has come on, and Chris Olave is nice. But they're sort of now getting into some of the deeper guys on that in that group, and it's not been great so far. Outside of the top three. So we're looking at probably like A.T. Perry starting, and he's been okay. I liked A.T. Perry coming out, but certainly not a guy that you're worried too much about. So we'll see how that develops, but at this point, the Saints offensive line has not been good either. So we'll go ahead and get into some of these matchups in this one. Before we dive into the specific matchups, did want to remind folks real quick that we have just launched channel memberships. If you're watching on YouTube, if for folks that are mostly video watchers, we wanted to offer something for you guys because the Patreon is mostly for the podcast in terms of the benefits. So if you're a frequent video watcher, if you're a live stream watcher, check out the channel memberships. The tiers are basically identical to the Patreon. It's just video centric stuff instead of Patreon. So take a look at that. If you're interested, want to support the channel, want some perks, some emojis, some recognition, some shout outs, early access to videos, usually, give or take 24 hours before they launch on the channel. You'll get some early access if you want to see stuff sooner in the week, that sort of thing. So check that out if you're interested. We appreciate everyone who's already signed up, and we're looking forward to meet more of you guys. Of course, it also gives you access to all the stuff the Patreon does in terms of like the fantasy leagues, the Q&A sessions, all that. It just doesn't, if you're already on the Patreon and you do mostly YouTube stuff, you may want to consider switching. If you're mostly a podcast listener, Patreon's probably what would be better for you. So whatever works for you. You don't need to sign up for both, unless you want both perks or you want to give us money twice, which, I'm fine with that. But this is not like an attempt to get people to give us money for multiple things. I just can't get Patreon and YouTube memberships to link up. That would be very convenient if we could just offer you one for both. But apparently I'm sure it's intentional that they don't play well together. So sorry about that. We're working on it to see if we can figure some workaround out. But for now, if you're more of a video person, the memberships would be for you. And if you're more of a podcast person, the Patreon's for you. Thanks to everyone once again for supporting us there. Let's dive into this Saints offense, which right now is okay, right? They're 18th in scoring, so a little bit below average, 13th in yardage, so a little bit above average. They've been decent in terms of passing. They're 11th in passing yardage, but they're 3rd in passing attempts. So they're really more like a little bit below average in terms of net yards per attempt passing. They've really struggled on the ground, surprisingly. They're 22nd in rushing yardage and 30th in yards per carry with just 3.6 yards per carry on the ground. And a lot of that has to do with that offensive line, which is just not playing well this year. They've had to shuffle. They lost, Teron Armstead because they said, oh, we don't need to pay him. He's hurt anyway, which, fair, but they haven't really found anyone to replace him. Trevor Penning has been a big liability. Ryan Ramczyk's still a great right tackle. He may not play this week. James Hurst, they've had to slot in at left guard because they're having issues with their guard depth as well. The one bright spot, other than Ryan Ramczyk, has been the center. Eric McCoy, I think, has been having a pretty good year. He's definitely bounced back after a couple of sort of mediocre years, the last couple. I think McCoy at center has been a guy that they have hit on. I think he's done a good job, but struggles as a pass blocker, really good run blocker. So we'll see how that goes. But right now, the Saints are looking at starting like Andrus Peat at tackle. If Ryan Ramczyk has to miss time, then it's probably Trevor Penning coming in at right tackle. That has not been good for them so far. So this is a pretty banged up Saints offensive line. And, James Hurst at left guard has also not practiced this week. So they might have to find another guard to step in there. And then, of course, Cesar Ruiz has been pretty much a bust for them. From their first round pick. They tried to play him at center, didn't really work out. At guard now, not really working out either. We talked about the receivers, Chris Olave, good. Obviously, Rashid Shaheed, I think, has definitely come on for them as their deep threat. But without Michael Thomas, they're basically hoping A.T. Perry can step into that role. And he's been decent, but hasn't done a whole lot yet. He's been mostly a game day inactive. And then after sort of a nice year last year, tight end Juwan Johnson hasn't really been able to replicate that. He's not been good this year. He's been a poor blocker, as you might expect for a converted receiver, and has just not been able to really make an impact. So the tight end position for the Saints has definitely taken a hit. They've sort of lost a lot of their tight ends. They've allowed them to walk, essentially. They let Adam Troutman walk. They haven't really, Taysom Hill, I guess, is the guy, but he's mostly just a gadget player, a guy that's going to come in and do some weird stuff at quarterback. Jimmy Graham is not Jimmy Graham of the past. He's simply just not that much of a option. Foster Moreau, I think, has been decent when called upon. But yeah, not great there. So in terms of the Saints passing game, you probably like the Falcons matchups in this one. With no Michael Thomas, that's a guy that Terrell has traditionally struggled with. He struggles against those big physical receivers. You have to think he's probably going to be matched up on like Chris Olave in this one. And that'll be a great battle. But I like Terrell against Olave better than I liked him against Mike Thomas. And then Jeff Okudah is probably matching up against the size of A.T. Perry. And I like that matchup too. I think Okudah is going to be able to handle that without too much trouble. And then D. Alford versus Rashid Shaheed in the slot, I think, is a really good one to watch. But it's good that they have D. Alford back because he's been arguably their best corner, which is crazy to say considering the other two guys they have. But, I think, you like the way the Falcons secondary matches up, Jesse Bates as well. And the Saints don't really have that difference-making tight end to take advantage of Richie Grant in coverage, which Richie Grant is not it. I'm pretty convinced at this point that he's not going to be the starter past this year. We'll see if he's brought back as anything more than depth, but he's just way too inconsistent. Doesn't play with a lot of discipline, misses a lot of tackles. He does have some splash plays, which is nice, but I do wonder if at some point we might see more Micah Abernathy or some other guys get shots for the Falcons. Maybe DeMarco Helms gets some more run, but Helms more of a box guy, so he's a little bit more limited in what they can do with him in coverage on the back end. And obviously safety probably something that we're going to see the Falcons address in the draft or free agency this year, even though they just added Jesse Bates, who's great. But looking at the matchups up front, you certainly, Eric McCoy has been great at run blocking, but the Saints ultimately still haven't been able to run the ball well at all. And even without Grady Jarrett, I think this is definitely still a place where the Falcons could take advantage. David Onyemata is going to be back this week. He's been practicing. That's great news. This is a very beatable interior that may also be down one of their starters as well. And then Calais Campbell probably going to be playing more inside, obviously, with Jarrett's injury. So we'll see. But I do like those matchups. even if Ryan Ramczyk is out, Trevor Penning, I mean, the Falcons really haven't been able to take advantage of backup tackles because their edge pass rush is just really bad. So we'll see if they are able to benefit from that at all. I mean, it can't hurt, obviously. The fact that Carr is not able to evade the pressure, as well as some of these running quarterbacks, maybe that leads to the Falcons having some more success there. But Bud Dupree, Arnold Ebiketie, Lorenzo Carter, those guys haven't really been it so far. So we'll see if they can maybe have a little bit more success this week against those guys. But moving on to the Saints run game, again, like the Falcons have defended the run very well, and this Saints rushing attack has not been good. I mean, it's been mostly dump offs to Kamara in the passing game. That's been sort of how they're running. That's been more of how they've done things. And that's obviously still very dangerous. Kamara is definitely healthy and back to his old ways. He's going to catch a lot of passes. He's going to be dangerous with the ball. But in terms of straight up running, they just haven't done a great job. And I think the Falcons defense matches up pretty well in that regard. The Falcons have good linebacker play against the run. The corners tackle well against the run. They don't have to deal with the threat of the running quarterback. I think that will help the run game as well. So that's a side of the ball where I think the Falcons definitely have an advantage, where they're probably going to be able to keep the Saints running game in check. It's more the dump off side of the backfield and Taysom Hill doing weird stuff that is going to be the issue. And we'll see how big of an issue it is. But at this point, I have a lot of confidence in the Falcons there. Moving on to the Falcons offense versus the Saints defense. This is still a very good Saints defense. It's not anywhere near as good as it was in its heyday. They're vulnerable up front like they haven't really been in years past. The Saints still decent against the pass. I would say good against the pass, right? I think they're 8th in passing yardage allowed, 7th in net yards per attempt. So in terms of yardage, pretty good. They have allowed actually a decent amount of touchdowns. I think they're like 16th in touchdowns allowed. And they've gotten a lot of picks, so that could be something that comes into play with Desmond Ridder starting. I mean, he hasn't thrown as many picks lately. It's more been the fumbles with Ridder. It's more maybe Heineke that was throwing the picks now, but we'll see if that becomes a factor. That's been sort of the Falcons' Achilles heel. But in terms of the run defense for the Saints, that has not been anywhere near as good as it's been in years past. In fact, it's been pretty vulnerable. Saints are 20th in rushing yardage allowed, and they're 23rd in yards per carry allowed at over 4.3. And again, Parker Hesse going to be back and active this week, according to Arthur Smith. So maybe that's something that really helps this run game. The tight end blocking has really not been on point. Maybe Parker Hesse's return helps them a lot in that regard. And we've heard that Bijan's going to be more involved. So hopefully this all comes together for a dominant rushing performance, because I don't think the Falcons are going to have a ton of success through the air against this Saints defense. They're still good at rushing the passer. They're still good up front, especially on the edge. Cam Jordan's still good. Carl Granderson has really come on as their secondary edge rusher. The Tano Passignon is Tano Passignon, I guess is how you say it. He's been solid as well, mostly as a run defender. But they've got some guys there that front is still pretty dangerous. Where they're a lot less reliable has been sort of in terms of the interior. They just really don't have the guys there anymore. They lost a lot to free agency, and their first round pick, Brian Brzee, he has not come on much this year, which is not surprising if you heard me talk about Brzee at all. He was always a guy that I thought was going to need time. But he's basically been a liability there, particularly against the run. They do have a pretty good nose that, they've got some guys. I think, Kalen Saunders as their nose tackle has been solid, right? But other than that, Nathan Shepard has been a liability against the run, decent against the pass, obviously. And then Malcolm Roach, I think, has been a good contributor against the run as well. But, they sort of have to decide if they want to play the run or the pass, because they don't really have two-way guys that are good at both. They're basically vulnerable in one way or the other. So, if I was someone who's a betting man, I would say that they're probably going to load up to stop the run and try to force the Falcons to pass. But, we'll see if that makes any difference, because they just really haven't stopped the run well. So, hopefully the Falcons are prepared. We know they're going to have a lot of blitzing. We know the linebackers are good. So we'll see how this goes in terms of that matchup. But, the Saints without Marshawn Lattimore, obviously they're going to be more vulnerable on the outside. We'll see who gets to start out there. I think PFF expects it to be like Isaac Yiadom. He could be out there. I know like Jordan Howden has played a fair amount for them. Maybe Alontae Taylor, who's been their slot, maybe he kicks out more. We'll see. But Paulson Adebo, one of my guys from the draft that I was pretty mad that the Saints got, he's been really good this year. So he's going to basically be their number one corner. So this may not be a Drake London week, right, if Adebo's matched up against him. But, we'll see who draws the start opposite Adebo in this one. And then, of course, the Saints do have Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May. Neither one are playing anywhere near the height of their powers. Marcus May in particular has not been particularly good this year. So we'll see. We'll see who ends up. They're vulnerable. Maybe this could be a potential Kyle Pitts game, right? If they actually throw it to him. So we'll see. But yeah, in terms of how the Falcons attack this Saints defense, it's going to be on the ground. I think that the best way for the Atlanta to beat the Saints is to run the ball well. I mean, that's probably the best way for them to beat any team. They just have been very inconsistent at doing it this year. So we'll see. But I do hope that the Falcons can get a little bit more consistency on the ground in this game. Maybe the Parker Hesse return helps there. Maybe, the going to Bijan Robinson helps more as well. But yeah, at this point, it's hard to trust this passing game. Drake London still reliable, but they're making Kyle Pitts play inline tight end, which is really stupid. So I hope they change off of that. You would think that the Falcons match up favorably on the offensive line against the Saints defensive line, but again, they've tended to really play down to their opponent on the offensive line. The Cardinals were not a great pass rush, and they gave up tons of pressure to Taylor Heineke, even got him hurt. Well, they didn't get him hurt. I mean, Heineke decided he was going to dive head first, and that's what got him hurt. So really wasn't the offensive line's fault on that one. But, you have to think that this is a game where the Falcons are going to ground and pound it and hope to take their shots where they can. Hopefully Ritter is prepared because he's going to see pressure. He's going to see blitz. But I do think this is it's a good defense, but it's a beatable one, particularly on the ground, and that's where the Falcons are probably going to need to succeed to win this. And ultimately, I think it's going to come down to the defense again. Like, is the defense just toast after losing Grady Jarrett? Like, because they've looked much worse since losing Grady Jarrett, like drastically worse. Is that just a crushing blow that they can't overcome? Or are they going to be able to rebound after the bye week, maybe get a little bit more consistency? That's sort of a big question in this one, but I do think this is a low scoring, ugly game. I think that both defenses are probably going to play well in this one, but I think the Falcons rushing attack is maybe going to be the difference maker here. I got a feeling that maybe Bijan could have like his best day as a Falcon this week. Just has, gets the carries with Parker Hesse back. Maybe there's more consistency with the blocking. He's getting all these yards. He's getting more work in the passing game. And the offense as a whole maybe doesn't have an explosive day through the air, but is able to get enough there. And maybe the red zone offense gets a little bit better too. I mean, that would be refreshing, right? But ultimately, I think this is like a 20-17 Falcons win, like an ugly game, low scoring game. The Falcons sort of squeak it out and keep the hopes for the season alive. But this is just the first step too. Like, they beat the Saints here. I think we'll have some hope. Fans will be happy, obviously, to beat the Saints no matter what. That Arthur Smith will buy himself a little bit of space here, but they'll need to finish. We can't just beat the Saints and then fall back into being a terrible team again. So, after this game, obviously, they've got some stuff coming up. They're going to have to find a way to get some wins over these next few weeks, right? They go to New York to play the Jets. We know the Jets have that great defense, but the quarterback situation there is just absolutely disastrous. They're going to Tim Boyle, who may be one of the only quarterbacks worse than Zach Wilson, because I guess they've decided that they're just not going to even try to upgrade the quarterback position. Then they play the Buccaneers at home. Then they go to play the Panthers. So, like, if you beat the Saints, I think there's a chance you could go into that Panthers game, or you could leave that Panthers game on like a 3-1 sort of thing. I think the most difficult game in that stretch is probably the Saints, but if they beat the Saints, maybe they don't sweep the Buccaneers. But again, the Bucs are pretty beatable as well, so we'll see. But I think if they go into that Colts game in Week 16, basically back towards 500, right? I think if they go 3-1, they'll be right at 7-7. That's a good setup for them, and will give them a chance to finish strong and potentially make the playoffs. And more than likely they're going to have to close out the season with that sweep of the Saints to make the playoffs. But we'll have to see how the rest of the season shakes out. And again, given that this team is coming off a 3-game losing streak, I'm not sold on them being consistently better. They're going to have to prove it, but beating the Saints this week would go a long way towards that, obviously. So here's to hoping. So I hope they do. I hope they figure it out, but we'll see how this one goes, guys, because it's going to be probably an ugly game. I hope the Falcons come out on top. I always hope the Falcons beat the Saints, and I'm going to have the Falcons beating them per my picks. But yeah, I don't expect it will be pretty. I just hope that they find a way to get it done like they haven't been able to the last several weeks. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Dirty Birds and Brews and our game preview this week. Let's beat the Saints. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe for watching on YouTube. Leave us that 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Today's show is, of course, brought to you by BetOnline and PrizePicks. We will see you guys on Sunday for that post-game show breaking down Hate Week Part 1. So, guys, thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time on Dirty Birds and Brews. I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin. We will see you next time. Have a great day, folks.